world where education is the most important thing for people on the ground. That's to say that a state is fully responsible for accessibility to education. In status quo, we currently see the poor shackled by their environment, unable to access a greater form of education. That is why under side government, we are going to prove how offering government scholarships to local universities is the best solution. Two things in this speech. Firstly, about state obligation. Secondly, about a safer means of investment. But before that, two pieces of setup. Firstly, what kind of government scholarships are we talking about? We're talking about government scholarships like JPA Mara, basically any form of scholarship subsidized by the government. We aren't talking about private scholarships like Petronas and Bengar etc. And that's to say that there are terms and conditions, like they have to work under the government for like 7 years under a contract. This means that as a result, they can already spread the knowledge of being in an overseas country while under their workforce, right? Next, we're going to cater these scholarships to people based on their socioeconomic status and not taking into account their race and whatsoever, right? Second piece of setup. What are like local universities look like, right? We see that local universities are universities that are run under the government, like for example, University of Malaya, UPM, ITM, etc. So that's to say that these local universities, they have cheaper fees and they cater to like the people who are in a lower income group as compared to like universities that aren't local that have like bigger fees and cater to the people who are much more privileged, right? So what is the burden that we have to prove? We have to prove why local universities need these government scholarships the most. And the world the opposition has to defend is that they have to prove how making these scholarships accessible to all universities is much more better for people on the ground. But before I move on to first argument about state obligation, any POIs? 3, 2, 1. Okay, so firstly, on the argument on state obligation, right? So the premise of this whole argument is that states have the obligation to cater to the welfare of their citizen, right? So that's to say that these obligations are the most stringent for those who are attending their local universities, and that these people will be representing their country, right? And aside from that, like people who go to public universities more often than not is because they can't afford to go to private universities. Like there is people from middle to that these local universities have people who are like from middle to low income class families. And these people from middle to low income class families, they're unable to attain extra education, like for example, private tuition and extra books, and they're forced to work jobs on the side to help their family. And what does this mean? It means that these people need the scholarships to continue to study, and the most likely university costs are expensive no matter like where you go, right? And these people, they have to take loans that they can't afford to pay back. So that's to say that these scholarships that we give to them, if we gave it to everyone and anyone, then these people would be forced to compete with those who are far more privileged than that. And we think that's extremely harmful, and not only harmful but also unfair and also unjust to people who are under the poverty cycle, right? We say that we want these people who are under the poverty cycle to break that poverty cycle in gaining quality education once they get these local scholarships. And the impact to this argument is that these underprivileged people would have a chance to further their education. That means they can live a better life, not only for themselves, but for their own children and generations to come. We say that this is how they can break that cycle of poverty. Once they get a better job by the result of the local scholarships, right? Because our local scholarship policy already allows these people to work under the government. That's to say that their jobs are already already have jobs in the future, right? And they can break that cycle of poverty by working under the government. When they have the chance to fight for scholarship, they are more likely giving it all in their studies. And that's to say that it is when they have hope. They can believe in themselves. They can believe in themselves to survive a harsh environment where society has put them in a place where they can't break out of that cycle, right? And when we give these local scholarships to these local universities, we're giving them these hope to actually become something much more better in the future. And the comparative is that our world, we are giving these chance to people at life, whereas opposition will only shut the door on them for not being good enough, for giving people who also have qualities, who for giving chances to people who have privileges, or rather than giving it to people who really need them, right? But before I move on to my second argument about a safer means of investment, is there any POIs? 3, 2, 1. So next, the argument on investment, right? Give me a minute. I accidentally X out. Argument on safer means of investment, right? So the premise of this whole argument is that we can actually guarantee people who get scholarship is to able to contribute back to the country. This means that government will actually select a number of people who are qualified and give them the scholarship for them to achieve a level of education that they can't afford to pay. So what we mean by safer means of investment is mean that we'll invest into the knowledge and education where once people who get the scholarship, they're going to come back to their country and they're going to work for the government. That means that people with a scholarship, they can actually give the contribution by teaching and sharing their knowledge, right, to the people on the ground, because we already gave you the policy on how these people are going to contribute back, right? And that's to say we can improve local companies and how they operate, because when they go out from another country, they can actually gain much more knowledge from, let's just say, developed countries, for example, like the UK and the US. They can gain that knowledge from those developed countries, and they can actually incorporate it into what they learn in local university, into what they work in local universities, right? So this means that government is able to ensure that these youth will work in a country and contribute instead of running away and to another countries. And sure, like some students will continue to work overseas. Some and sure, if we actually allowed people to not contribute back to their country, not put them under a contract, then some students will continue to work overseas after the studies and all that such. And the impact is that government will able to invest in youth and will contribute to their home country. So the whole conclusion that I gave you is how it is actually state obligation to cater to the welfare of their citizens, to cater to people in local public universities first, rather than other private universities, right? Because that's what state obligation is. And secondly, we told you about how it's going to be a safer means of investment to guarantee people who get their scholarship is able to contribute back to their country. And with that, I'm extremely proud to propose.
This house like to thank the Prime Minister. I'd like to invite the leader of opposition. You're here.
Wait, just give me a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, this debate is composed of a few important and significant things, right? Education, knowledge are key terms in this debate that we believe the Prime Minister did not touch on what they define knowledge as and other things that we would like to disagree on, right? At the end of the day, education is the main reason to why people are studying and having degrees, right? Why people are going to these universities and studying abroad and studying locally, whatever there is. The main reason is to put food on the table. At the end of the day, they want a family to go back to and have a life and have a better life, right? So as the leader of opposition, I will do a couple of things. What are they? Number one, I will start off by saying what we on the opposition side disagree and what we believe that should go better on our side. I will only touch on this and I will touch and mention on these things, but my explanations will be furthermore in my speech. So please pay attention to that. I will also tell you what's happening in the status quo regarding on our side of the motion, what problems that arises and what problems do we solve by giving government scholarships to not only local universities, but also other types of universities as mentioned by the Prime Minister, right? I will also give a specific mechanism and policy to what extent should give out government scholarships and why this trumps the arguments based on what the Prime Minister has said. I will give a comparison of what happens on our side, what happens on that side, and why this comparison trumps the argument and gives a structured analogy on why we should win, right? So let's start with what we disagree from the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister mentioned people who go to government mostly because they cannot afford private universities. What does this say, right? The statement says basically when you say that people go to government universities only because they cannot afford private universities, what does this mainly say? First and foremost, it says that people want private universities, that people want to go to overseas universities rather than government universities, but they only go to government universities because they cannot afford to pay the fees and to pay the scholars and anything else, right? So when this statement happens, we tell you that you cannot assume that everybody going to a private university is rich, right? Many people are in debt. Many people are taking loans to fund themselves into going to private universities. So we see that this is not something that happens. She also mentioned how by giving only government scholarships to like being open about it, citizens are forced to compete with privileged people. And she also did the comparison between underprivileged people, people under the poverty line, and people who are privileged, who you know have. But we tell you that under certain restrictions that our scholarship is offering, which I will explain later, that competition exists on both sides, right? On both sides of this debate, competition exists between local students and between private students. We tell you that under certain restrictions, because scholarships isn't just given to people who have merit. It's also based on your income, your family income. There are restrictions that happen, and because of this, we believe that our world would be better. Also, but the contributing back, that part will be explained furthermore in my bit. So what's happening on the status quo on our side, right? So enrollment is limited. We tell you that it's not unlimited. People, more than thousands of students are applying and enrolling every year, right? Not only to locals, but also to privates, right? So what happens when enrollment is limited? You can assume that everybody going to private is rich. People will, when the local universities placings are limited, people will opt out to go to other universities, right? And because of this, they do need a scholarship. They need a scholarship to fund themselves and to put food on the table. We are giving them an option to not only go to local universities, but also go to other universities, to overseas universities, to private universities. Why do we see that? What problems does this arise on the government side, right? So a lot of people opt out to go to private because there isn't sufficient placing in local universities. What does, first and foremost, it gives rise to debt. A lot of people are in debt. A lot of people are taking out loans just to go to private universities because of certain reasons, not only because they do not have placing, but because they believe that private institutions have better facilities, and they have a better chance at living out their full potential, right? What do we define as knowledge? On our side, knowledge is not only opening the textbook and getting a 4 flat GPA. Knowledge on our side is having experience, going to international levels and gaining connections with other people, having experiences. What makes a student isn't the books, isn't the grades, isn't something on a piece of paper. What makes a student is when you go out and experience connections and you bring back and contribute back to the country, right? To what extent should we give out government scholarships, right? We first and foremost, we give it out based on income and based on merit. So it restricts the fact that people under the poverty line would compete with people that privileged. Yeah, they're both competing. They're both competing for a spot and for a scholarship. But the line here is that it's based on merit. So may the best man win. Not only that, it's also based on income. So actually, people below the poverty line would have a higher chance should they have the same academic qualification, right? We believe that the Prime Minister also talked about how it's a safer investment in having them contributing back to the country, but that will be on my next explanation. But we do believe that sacrificing a portion of the government's expenses is so much better than investing and having low-class graduates. What do we mean by low-class graduates? Because we cannot deny that although our local universities are good, yes, they are. But when you compare to private universities, when you compare to international overseas universities, you cannot deny that their facilities are better. The library is much bigger. Their facilities are so much more better on that side. And not only that, they give much more experiences rather than you just sit in this country, right? So what happens, I'll tell you what happens on our side and what happens and why do we believe that we should offer to all types of universities, right? So the structure would be when you give more scholarships, first and foremost, there would be more students, and because there's more placing, more people in universities, it overall promotes to a better society. And by putting certain restrictions, like coming back after, it brings a whole lot of benefits. When we say contributing back to the nation, having people on our side contributing back to the nation would happen better. Why? Because they already have the experience outside, so they won't feel the need to go out. Whereas on your side, when you only study inside the country, you would want to work more outside. Therefore, you're not going to contribute to the country because you're going outside and contributing to the nation. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Deputy Prime Minister. Yeah.
Sorry, can you just give me a minute to check my timer?
Yeah, sure, no worries.
Okay. I'm audible, right?
Yes, you are.
All right, thank you. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Chair, side opposition tried to give you a very convenient narrative on how the world actually looks like. They tried to tell you that most of the people who go to private universities are usually those who can't afford it in the first place, and are usually majority of them are in debt. We tell you not only is this not true, but we tell you that this is unlikely in the first place because when we give these scholarships to these local universities, they would be more attractive for these people who know that they can't afford these private universities to go to these local universities. Now, not only that, but although we concede that yes, private universities do tend to have better facilities or a better schooling environment, we tell you that that is not usually enough reason for people to go in depth for it. We tell you that it's not seen anywhere around the world, or at least not in a high case scenario, right? We tell you this is mostly rare case or very lightly happening. Okay. So now I will begin my speech with a couple of issues, and then I will extend on my first speaker. So, first of all, what they fail to understand is that we are trying to cater to the underprivileged people, right? We mentioned this in my first speaker. So now the problem is, why do we need to cater to these underprivileged people? And we have a different understanding of underprivileged with side opposition, because when we mean underprivileged, as we mentioned by our prime minister, we are talking about people who are forced to work multiple jobs or have to work on the side other than studying for the sake of their family, because their family itself is not enough to give them proper means of education, right? So we have to cater to these people, because if not, if we don't cater for these people, who will, right? And this is what side opposition fails to acknowledge, right? Because what they don't understand is, like it or not, private-based scholarships tend to be merit-based. Even if they want to randomly say that, oh yeah, they look at our income or we want to apply for private scholarships, we tell you that regardless of what it is, they will always prioritize people with merit-based performance. And we've also demonstrated to you why that is significantly unfair, and not even unfair, unjust for those who are underprivileged. Because we've seen this all around the world. We see numerous people who put in far more effort than others, but they're not given the chances or opportunities that these privileged people are given, right? We tell you that if they were playing on the same level playing field, these people would properly dominate those who were born with wealth, right? Those born with a silver spoon in their mouth. So, and the third issue, right, I would like to bring up is that how they try to argue that these people more often than not won't even want to work back in our country, right? And we tell you that is, first of all, it's not likely, because as mentioned by my first speaker, they have a contract to follow. So we give you, essentially the government gives you an education, you study overseas, and then you have to come back and work under the contract period until it is finished, right? That is your way of repayment to the government and to the country. So ignoring all of the reasons that my prime minister has given to you, right? we also tell you that this is only exclusive on our side of the house. Now, why is this so? Because when you put private people into these scholarships, they have no incentive to come back. When you send them to a country, for example, these are usually countries that are more developed than the country we live in today, for example, they have no incentive to come back because they're living in a better environment, they're exposed to new people, and they are getting most probably relatively higher paying jobs, or they're at least exposed to higher job opportunities. We tell you that when you give these people this kind of access, we tell you they will leave and they will not come back. Whereas on our side, we guarantee to at least get some profit out of these people, right? So now I would like to also bring up the fact that apart from the fact that my prime minister has already told you the severity of allowing these two people, these two classes of people to compete, I would like to highlight that side opposition not only allows it, but they will encourage it even, because they're trying to say that competition is important because they want the best man to win, even though we have clearly told you why this is not possible and is only more detrimental for the people who don't have a chance. These are the people who don't have the same amount of education, amount of experiences that could happen. And like opposition mentioned, sometimes it's not just about your grades, it's about experience and whatnot. And we tell you, regardless of the fact, it still relies, it still caters heavily towards these well-privileged people. Now, the problem is, right, even if you want to argue that private people, some of them are in debt, we tell you the majority are not. So why should the majority people be allowed the same opportunity as these in debt to fight local government students, right? Because we tell you at the end of the day, even if these people are in debt, they would still lose to their peers who are far more privileged than them. So at the end of the day, they lose more people than on our side, right? Now, I will begin to extend on my, wait, before that, POIs? No, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I will now extend on my first speaker's argument on how it creates a safer means of investment, right? Because when these people have done their education overseas, when they come back, not only will they in itself have to work for the government by producing and paying taxes and give economic developments, but they can also comment on how their experiences were with these universities, these local universities, or they can even reinvest in these local universities, because this is what we've seen all around the world when there are large universities that are responsible for the growth of these individuals. More often than not, they will come back and reinvest for the betterment of the future generation. We tell you that the government is able to ensure that these youth will work in the country and contribute instead of running away and staying at another country full time. Now, we understand there are also a huge loss to the country to lose these talents, right? Because what side opposition is trying to defend, right? They're trying to defend a world where you have these very talented people, because they tried to mention that even if we graduate from local universities, they will be of lower quality, right? We tell you that it is far better for us to have low quality people come back and work instead of having high quality people leave altogether. And that is purely exclusive on our side of the house, unless they can prove otherwise. So what are the main impacts of this, right? Government will be able to invest to the youth that will contribute back to the home country, and these youth will have proper investment they need to use so that they are able to fully unlock their true potential, right? So what is the comparative? In our world, the taxpayers' money will be invested in people who contribute back to the country. On opposition's world, the taxpayers' money will be spent on students who ended up studying and working overseas without any contribution back to the nation. And with that, never been prouder to propose.
Okay, this house thanks the Deputy Prime Minister. I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Okay, just give me a minute to set my timer. Okay, I hope I am audible. All right, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So first and foremost, I will begin my speech with a couple of rebuttals, which will be further analyzed in my arguments. So I would just like to bring up a few things. First and foremost, I will be explaining what a scholarship in our sense, in terms of opposition means, which is actually failed which was failed to be brought up by the Prime Minister of side government, which I have to carry the burden to explain what a scholarship actually means in this debate. So to us, a scholarship um, is a type of financial aid that lies between income and merit, because if you're going to talk about financial aid solely based on income and trying to help those who are in need of tuition fees, that is just bursaries and discounts. But if you want to bring in merit as well, that's where scholarship usually lies in, because they do have to consider the merits of the students and they can't just blindly give it due to their financial background and whatnot. And then I would also like to rebut the sense of my leader of opposition have mentioned that when we have these scholarships, we will be bounded to the government. So I don't understand what side government is trying to bring up when they said that we are trying to propose a world whereby the students who accept scholarships from the government will leave the country as soon as they see these wealthy and nice facilities, and because of that our scholarship is burnt. No, they will come back and they will serve our nation as per mentioned in the terms and conditions of the scholarship. And I would also like to rebut something that was mentioned by the Prime Minister, mentioning that because of the state laws or something, she mentioned that they wanted to cater to the welfare of their citizens. But let me also remind you that the citizens who chose or who had no choice but to go to private universities are also still the citizens of the country, of the government, that the government has responsibility over these people. So even if they choose to enroll themselves in private universities due to certain reasons that I will get on with my arguments later on, they are still citizens nevertheless and should be given the priority of the government, not just those who are in local universities. Not everyone who goes to a private university can afford for their tuition. That is what we are trying to propose. Although outside government say that is not a high case scenario, that is actually coming for someone coming from a middle range family. It is very often you see middle range families, they end up sending their children to private universities just because they didn't make the cut for B40 in or any other whatever the country is, depending on what their social financial income is, their stance. I mean, they don't make the cut to make it into government universities just because they're not poor enough. But what they fail to understand is that these middle range income families are not rich enough either to pay for these tuition fees, which they do end up in debts. If they are working part-time or if they end up in debts, there are both two situations and scenarios we are trying to avoid at any cost. They will end up in debt, they will be taking personal loan, and they do that because they want to further their education and bring their family out of poverty, because we all know that the main key to bring your family out of poverty is through education, is through getting a stable professional job in the future. But by doing that, you need to get education, and just because they don't make the cut to go into government universities because they're not poor enough, it does not mean that they are rich enough to pay for their tuition fees in private, which is why we are giving them a chance as well to take up the government scholarships if they are indeed they align with the requirements of the scholarship. The scholarship will definitely have terms and conditions and boundaries and requirements, such as you need to have a total salary income of this much in your household, or you need to be able to reach this amount of credit scores and whatnot. And only then will we be able to consider you as a candidate to award you with this scholarship. And then another thing I would like to highlight from my leader of opposition who have mentioned, we have very few local universities as to compare to private universities. So because of that, the enrollment cannot fit all of your citizens, whether or not poor or rich. You will not be able to fit everyone into these local universities. What do you expect them to do? Do you expect them to opt out a year and just wait for them to reapply? No, they're wasting time, they're wasting space. They should just go and try to start studying somewhere else, which leads them into debt. So yeah, scholarships are meant to be awarded to the finest students, not only just because you are poor, I give it to you. This is not a bursary, this is a scholarship that we're speaking about. So if you work hard and you have excellent results, you have excellent co-curricular activities, that is sufficient enough to award you as a candidate that to fight for that scholarship. What I don't understand from side government is that they fail to mention how these underprivileged kids will lose to the privileged kids. They just keep mentioning this sentence without actually proving what they lose against, what is their pros, what is their cons. I don't understand their stance at all. So I believe that you're just saying that they're losing out due to money and due to the posh lifestyle that these wealthy kids live. They have tuition, they have whatnot. So I believe that this is what you're trying to explain. But then again, with or without all of these tuitions and these wealthy privileges, it is not impossible for these underprivileged kids to perform as equally as good as the privileged kids, or even better. There are so many inspiring stories from people who are from villages or underprivileged countries or underprivileged states, that they can achieve the same amount of success as rich and wealthy people can do. So it is not something impossible, it's just something that is harder to do, which I don't believe it is something wrong for you to put a student through a very hard situation to show that they are worthy enough to be a candidate for a scholarship. And I would also like to bring up that some universities have special courses, or they specialize better in certain courses. For example, University Technology Petronas, that is a private university, but their chemical engineering course is so good, no public university can compete when you speak about QS worldwide ranking and whatnot. So, of course, students who have been passionate about courses, just for example, chemical engineering, they would want to go to the best university where they can get the best education possible despite their financial background. So, when you open up government scholarships to even private sectors, you're also giving the chance of the student who has been passionate about this field for a very long time to obtain the best quality of education, which is our main goal. When we give scholarships to students, we're not just saying that it is better to produce low quality students than the people that will leave. No, I already cleaned out the slate that we are bounding the students to work back with the government when they take up the government scholarship. So we are giving them quality education to be quality students in the future. um, and when we don't support these students, they end up going to overseas countries like Indonesia, Russia, and whatnot, because they are much cheaper than private universities. They're somewhat something that they can afford, and then you come back with very low quality students who don't even set a benchmark for the international standards or recognition like MBBS or engineering and whatnot. So with that, I think it is clear to say that side government failed to mention a lot of things which was made our side opposition carry the burden of everything. And I would just like to say that with this, I rest my case. Thank you.
Okay, this has like to thank the deputy leader of opposition for their speech. We would like to invite the government here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Alright, just give me a sec. Alright, just one last check. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, cool. Just give me a sec. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, before I proceed to tell you why is it so important for us to prioritize local universities over private universities, despite all the things that side opposition has argued to us, I'm going to point out several flaws that exist on side opposition that they need to deal with, right? Firstly, they're trying to tell you that people who are in the low level of socioeconomy still go to private universities. But my second speaker already proved to you that that's not always the case. The majority case, like the usual case of people who go to private, are those who are already privileged and rich enough. And I think that it is also like the kind of like the front cover of what like private universities usually are, right? It's places for rich people. But even if that's not the case, even if there are still people who are who are like in the low level of socioeconomy, still goes to the private universities, right? We tell you that as the government or the authority only has like so much resources, which means they have like limited resources, they have limited money, which means they have to make a good decisions, right? And I think that local universities, although this is really self-explanatory, is that the large number of majority of people right now, they rely on local universities, right? But I think this alone is enough reason for me to prove why we cannot like consider every unfortunate events that happen in the country. We must only focus on the one source of place where people actually go to and like hope to get a good education, right? People go to local universities because that is the place where they can afford, and it is still a good platform to do so, right? But lastly, they kept telling us that our policy is strong. They kept saying that we cannot only prioritize socioeconomy, we also have to prioritize merit. But the thing is, the first thing that usually scholarships see is the socioeconomic. What does this mean? It means that we local scholarships tend to like prioritize people who comes from the low level of socioeconomy. But that does not necessarily mean that if I were to be in the low level of socioeconomy and I get like 8 fails and whatnot, that does not necessarily mean that I will still get selected through scholarships, right? We will still value and consider their merit, but like parallel with their socioeconomic background. So what are the issues that I'll deal with in this debate? First is, who do we protect, right? We want to protect the local universities. Why so? Because like I stated earlier, is that people rely on local universities, right? The first thing that parents think of to send their to send their children off to like learning and get higher education is through local universities. It's really rare for us to think of, well, we should send them immediately to private universities regardless of the debt or whatever it is that the side opposition wants to defend. So why local universities? Because it is cheaper and it is still a good institution. We still have good lecturers, we still have good like infrastructures to make sure students actually get like a good level of the theory education and whatnot. But secondly, I'll explain to you by why only focusing on local universities we're able to improve the education system in local universities, right? So how does this work? When government only gives scholarships to the local universities, it means that they need to find more people who they need to create more students who are like actually they need to create more intelligent students. They need to create more students who are actually qualified with the merit. They actually need to create students who are actually like kind of like on par with like smart students in private universities, right? So which means when we only force government to give scholarships to local universities, now government have no choice but to improve the education system of local universities itself to make sure that they produce a lot of smart students and like students that we think is more reliable to contribute back to the society. Why is this so impossible? Why is this impossible to why is this like impossible to do so if we want to give like local scholarships to everyone regardless of what institutions they come from? Because we tell you that first, government do not have the money to do so, but secondly, if we try to prioritize if we try to prioritize everyone, we tell you that at the end of the day, government would be more likely to prioritize people who come from private universities. Why is this so? Because even side opposition agree that people that the infrastructures and the education system in the like private universities are much more better. Which means people who are in the local universities, where people actually go there with the hope that they are able to continue to overseas or greater universities for their tertiary education, this will not be achieved at the end of the day, right? Which means that when we try to like open up scholarships, we will only give to like students from private universities, and at the end of the day, we are students will be less likely to go to local universities because they don't think that they don't think that students who go to local universities are good enough. But the reality is that in the first days, the education level ground for people who go to local universities and private universities is already unfair, like what my second speaker already explained to you. But secondly, it's on the unfair ground of education, right? What does this mean? First, we'll tell you that private and local is not on a fair ground to compete, because my second speaker already proved to you that like people in local universities, firstly, the majority cases is that they are in the low level of socioeconomy, which means they cannot really afford to go to extra tuitions. They cannot really afford to buy your really thick and expensive textbook to compete with people in the private universities, where in the private universities you are able to get good infrastructures, you are able to get lecturers from like multiple countries who are able to use like a high level of technology and whatnot. So we think that this itself is already unfair. But number two, we tell you that the local universities usually have like a lot of more underprivileged students. So we say that this itself is already unfair, because if you want to like make a comparison between people who actually people who can afford to get a like higher level of education and whatnot. But lastly is the role of the state, right? So what does this mean? First, we tell you that the role of the state is to help people to get education and stuff. And we think that we think that local university is the place to do so. But secondly, is to also help students who go to local universities to achieve higher education at the end of the day, because that is the first place where society actually relies on to get a good education. But lastly, we tell you that they want to prioritize those who are underprivileged, right, in the low level of socioeconomy, because these are the people who can't afford to gain to go to like private universities such as Sunway and whatnot, right? So panel, at the end of this debate, understand that the authority or the government does not have all the resources in the world to prioritize every student. They need to cater to the large majority of the society, right? And we say that in the long run, local university must always be prioritized, because people rely heavily on local universities. And we tell you that we can only improve local universities and make sure that teachers and students actually stay in Malaysia and get a good level of education is by giving only local scholarships to only local universities, right? So with that being said, go with state government.
Okay, this sounds like thank the output for the speech. I'd like to invite the output to end the substantive speeches. Here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you.
Okay. I'll wait for the timer. Okay, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am the third speaker of side opposition, and I'll be fulfilling two tasks. Number one is to provide rebuttals, and number two is to tell you that the world that opposition have created is much more fair and much more equal than what the world has government has created. Starting off with my first point. Throughout this debate, what government does not understand that side opposition is trying to tell you is that we're not when we are saying that the government scholarships is not only going to be given to when we are saying that government scholarships are not only going to be given to local public university. Yes, we are considering them. We are also going to give it to private. We're going to take into account private institutions. You are saying throughout this debate that what side opposition wants to achieve is that we want to give scholarships to private university and we're going to ignore public universities, which is wrong. Okay, moving on to my first rebuttal. Side government does not understand the process of how do you enter a public university. Now, let me make it clear for you. How do you enter a public university? You go through a series of applications to apply for public universities. Okay, starting off, the first speaker of the Prime Minister of side government said that when you enter a government university, you're not taken into account your race, which is much wrong. You as the government side have already set a quota. You already said that okay, this much of percentage of Bumiputras has to enter the public university. This amount of Indians and Chinese people have to enter. So now let us say that only 30 people can enter. Enter 30 Chinese people can enter a public university. Now, but 40 people have already scored straight A's. That means only 30 people can be taken into account. What about the 10 people? Like what my second speaker of side opposition say? Are they going to wait a year? Are they going to waste their resources? They're going to sit down at home, watch the TV, and just wait and apply another year? Is that what are they going to do? What about these 10 neglected people who come from underprivileged but couldn't get in because of the quota that government people have set? And then you carry on and said that those who cannot afford private universities will automatically enter the government university. That is very much wrong. You do not understand. Side government does not understand the process of how do you enter a public university. You do not just step in and you say, okay, I'm underprivileged and I have good results and already accepted into this university. That's not how the intake of public universities work. Let me remind you that what my first and second speaker have said, that the intakes are very much limited. And then when even if you're from a low financially unstable family and you want to continue your studies, then you go and opt for private universities where you will take up loans and you'll be under debt just because in the need you want to provide food for your table. Okay, next thing, you claimed, side opposition, that we are going to give scholarships to everyone, as if we are not considering their merit. But it was made clear by both my first and second speaker that we will take into account their merit and their financial stability, and not. Let me remind you again, not all rich people, not people who are financially stable, automatically goes into a private university. That's also not how it works. Um, Okay, let me give you a simple analysis. What side government is trying to give you is, let's say person A is from a private university, person B is from a public university, and both of them score excellent results. Um, both of them scored excellent results. And now what side opposition is trying to say that we're going to consider both person A and person B. But what side government is trying to do is that we're only going to consider person B. And then when person C, who's also from a public university, didn't score well, we're also going to consider them because why? They are from a public university. And also, let me mention my fourth rebuttal. You are side government is contradicting to our point. You are coming to a goal on side opposition. You say that you want to send the students to overseas and let them apply their knowledge when they get back and work here. Isn't that, since when do public universities exist in other countries? Isn't that contradicting with our point? Isn't that you agreeing with our point, saying that we want to provide scholarships for those who are not necessarily from public universities? And then moving on to my fifth rebuttal, let me tell you the world opposition has created. What opposition has created is where students who come from private university, when they have a good merit results and they can get the facilities that they have, um, they're able to get the scholarship that they deserved. Whereas the second speaker of side government agreed that private universities have very much good resources, but yet you're regretting your but then you're not letting students go into private university solely because you prioritize public university. Did you know that the article that provided by Star Online said that the government itself has cut down 10 to 31% of their fundings to government universities, only because government universities has been too dependent on the government, meaning that when their financial resources are cut down, they do not have the resources to provide for their students. That's when the private institutes come in. Why can't the government be smart enough to their send the children or send the students into private university to get all the resources, and then to get a win-win situation where they can come back and they can work under the government they can work under the government. And then moving on to my sixth rebuttal, the second speaker mentioned that they prefer low quality people in their country compared to high quality people in their country. They prefer that it's okay that public universities have less resources compared to private universities. It's just that we prefer taking low quality people. So that means that side government, you do not want your country to establish. You just want your country to remain as it is. You say that you only want low quality people. You take in the low quality people. You take in a majority amount of low quality people, you ignore the high quality people. Is that what you're trying to say? And moving on to my last rebuttal, you said also that when people study in private university, when government provides a scholarship for those who are studying in private institutes, they're automatically going to leave the country. Do you not understand how the process of a scholarship works? There will be a bond where once you're done completing your studies, you need to come back and you need to serve that bond. If not, you need to pay a certain amount. So um so without understanding the process of this, how scholarships works, you can't claim that when someone studies in a private institute, they automatically will have the mindset to leave the country. So with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Asas then the output likely that the output belajar here.
Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, this debate isn't exactly about whether or not we should give government scholarships to local universities or private universities or overseas universities. It's not about that. It's more so about the quality of education. It's about the lives of students and why these two aspects are much better on our side compared to the government side, right? So, from the reply speech today, I'll give you a recap on what I had said for my first speech as the leader of opposition, what my DLO has said, what my whip has said, and comparing it to what the PM and DPM and the Gov whip has brought to today's debate, and overall why we gave a better case on our side and why we built a better world uh, in the context of this today's debate, right? So firstly, the PM defined a few things, right? Okay. She also and then she spoke about knowledge, but didn't define it. In my speech, we define knowledge as being much more than books and academics, and we also highlighted the fact that enrollment is limited, and that they cannot assume everybody going to private is rich. That statement we have on both sides we have been going back and forth about that statement throughout all three speakers. So, as summary to that, the government relies on the belief that the majority of people applying to private universities are rich, and only a minority of them are actually in debt or loans. And we say that actually no. My DL has also given strengthened that our argument made by me by highlighting middle range families that aren't rich enough to support themselves in private universities, but aren't poor enough to have uh, based on the argument made by by the government side, right? Because of that, we tell you that the government side is being ignorant and saying that not accepting our status quo, that not that not everybody going to private universities are privileged, right? Also talked about how they would rather invest in people uh, by having they would rather have a lot of number of workers contributing back to the country rather than have qualified academically people, right? So this comes into question the quality of education, which is far more better on our side, that we prioritize education and the academic qualification of one. It raises the question, is quantity really better than quality? What are they trying to raise? Are they trying to regress a society? Whereas on our side, we are prioritizing knowledge and education and overall the life of a student, right? We told you how my DLO said, told you a difference between financial aid and scholarships, the difference between between aiding to people below the poverty line and certain income line, and scholarships which are based on merits, which furthermore trumps the government side's arguments. And my DL also gives specific examples of how facilities on private universities are so much better, which has been agreed on by some of the speakers by the government, but other speakers would disagree. So we believe that it would be very contradictory on their side, and why their side's case is much more less believable. The whip talked about how they needed to how when on their side, the university has no choice to improve the facilities in local universities because giving scholarships to only local universities. But uh, they also mentioned that they don't that the government doesn't have money, and that the money is limited resources and they cannot cater towards everybody, right? So based on that, if you're saying that they don't have money to give scholarships, what makes you think they have money to improve local universities facilities, right? It's easy for the government side to say that it's an unfair ground to compete, but we say that it promotes a healthy competition situation, whereas a healthy competition between students regardless of the background, purely based on their academic qualification and merit. My whip gave rebuttals that supported um, each my speech and also my deal speech regarding financial income analysis, and she also mentioned the contradictory statements said by all three speakers of the government side. And we also highlighted many times that regarding statement contributing back to the country, we highlighted many times from the first speech. We highlighted that there would be restrictions in order for them to not go and work in another country, but yet they kept pushing the narrative that, and they kept asking us how to prove that people will contribute back to the country when there's already restrictions in the scholarship itself, right? And they also talked about that they are going to prioritize their citizens. But what do you mean by their citizens? It's the government. All these citizens, regardless of or which uni they go to, they deserve a right to have aid and have scholarships and an option to opt out rather than just be restricted in local universities, right? That's all from me. Thank you.
This has to claim the op reply. We'd like to invite Gaf reply to end the debate. Here.
Thank you. I'm audible, right?
Yeah, you are.
Oh, okay. Sorry, just give me a minute. Okay. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Chair, the most concerning issue in this debate, the one issue that should lead you to the winner of this debate, depends on who caters to the most vulnerable person, right? So now that leads to the second question. Who is the most vulnerable people in this debate? And I've mentioned this in my second speech, why it is that we have to cater to these underprivileged people in these local universities, right? Or local universities in general. Not only because they are mostly underprivileged, but because they are the ones representing the country, as mentioned by my first speaker. This is also why the state has a higher obligation for those who attended these local universities. So, in the 25 minutes that you've heard opposition talking, right, the easiest way to break it down or to simplify it is to say that they could have just said, we concede that these underprivileged people should not be given education. We concede that these people should be left to rot on the side, or they should be left to do whatever it means necessary for them to sustain their livelihood, right? And this is seen in multiple layers in their case, right? Because first of all, they want the main clash. First of all, is because healthy competition. What is healthy competition, right? On our side, we tell you we want competition within local universities. And we've also explained that because our first speaker has told you there are multiple forms of scholarships. There are not only government scholarships, there are also private scholarships. And we tell you that therefore we would like to separate the two and leave government scholarships for competition within these government schools where private universities can compete in their own private scholarships. Now, why is this important, right? Because this also mitigates their case, right? As they've kept on mentioning how there's like not enough quota, right, for these people in local universities, and it is because because of this quota, there are like a very small group of people who are displaced, and it's because they are displaced, they have to take a loan and go in debt in these private universities. However, we have told you that by allowing these two scholarships to appear, right, it mitigates the issue altogether because now you have more space to compete in these local scholarships and you have more space to compete in these private scholarships, right? Because more often than not, local government students will all apply for these local scholarships. So what can you take from this debate, right? On our side, we are telling you that we should cater to the majority of these people affected, and the majority of the people affected are in local universities. Now, the opposition have tried to argue that there are poor people in these private universities, and I'll bring back up the analogy given by their whip, I think, where they said if there are 40 people that applied for the local university, but 10 people got displaced. What they fail to understand is they are sacrificing 30 people for the 10 people. But that is just a small scale, right? When we larged up the numbers, we show you that we are catering to a higher volume of people in need at that. And they are just simply looking for excuses to give these privileged people even more power. We tell you that these people are the cruelest people we've ever met and that they don't want to concede how cruel they are because they see it as a healthy competition. They see it as a fair playing ground, even though we've told you multiple times these people will not be treated in a fair manner and they do not stand a chance against these people. This is why we win this debate, because we have successfully catered to a larger volume of these people affected, which is agreed upon by both parties, clear that. But we cater to a larger volume, and we cater to them in a larger magnitude, because we have narrowed down their level of competition, we narrowed down their level of playing field to amongst people roughly around their level, right? And we've also told you the harms of opening up to these private universities if they were to have the healthy competition that opposition wants so dearly, right? We tell you that even if you want this healthy competition to give the private students in debt, if you want to give them a chance, then you want to open up this scholarship to everyone. We tell you that it wouldn't work either, because those privileged in the private universities will still dominate the competition regardless. For all those reasons, for the reasons that we cater to the actual stakeholders of the debate in a far better way, we win this debate without a doubt. Never been prouder to propose.
Okay, so thank both houses for the speeches. Yeah, y'all can take a break. I will come back to you all with the verdict in a bit.